and play on 2nd and 10. That's his youth right there.
Tagovailoa trying to make up for it. Fires to the end zone. Touchdown! Alabama wins!
Today I will be giving my final 2025 college football rankings. So 1 and 2 is easy. So this was a great national championship game. The difference though was that block punt by Indiana's Mikel Kamara. Because other than that, Miami did outplay them by a little bit. And even though Carson Beck had a terrible first half, he played great in the second half until he threw that game-losing interception. And Indiana shut down Malachi Tony in the first half, but in the second half they couldn't stop him, and he ended up having a huge game of 10 catches for 122 and a touchdown. Indiana, though, did shut down Kalane Marion, who gave Ole Miss a nightmare of a game. But this Indiana offensive line did struggle with Reuben Bain and Akeem Messidor. Those two combined for 3 sacks. And this Miami offensive line did a better job against the Indiana pass rush than I thought they would. They limited them to just 1 sack. The problem was outside of that 57-yard touchdown run by Mark Fletcher, the Miami offensive line couldn't open up much room to run. But Miami did a good job at stopping Indiana's run. They held them to just 131 rushing yards and 2.9 yards per run. But Charlie Becker deserves a lot of credit in this win because those two amazing catches on 3rd and 4th down that he made, without those, Indiana doesn't win that game. And Mendoza, this wasn't his best game statistically, but he still made the plays for Indiana when they had to have them. That touchdown run on 4th and 5 might have been the most impressive play in this year's college football playoff.
Got to get to the 8. He's going to take off and run. Mendoza weaves his way first and goal, diving toward the end.
I thought that was a mistake at first by Kurt Cincinnati because they were well in range for their kicker, but it turns out he knew exactly what he was doing. And this was the most impressive coaching job in college football history because Cincinnati won a national championship with 0 5-star players and very few 4-star players. And I don't think Indiana is going away anytime soon. Now, I'm not saying they're winning another national championship, although I think they could do that. I am saying that they're going to stay good, I think, as long as Kirk Cincinnati is their coach. And number 3, I've got Ole Miss because they nearly beat Miami, who turns out was almost as good as Indiana. And Ole Miss, I've got ahead of Georgia, who I've got at 4 because even though they split with each other, Ole Miss, their win was a playoff game on a neutral field, while Georgia's was a home win. But Ole Miss, I think, should be ahead of Oregon because Oregon, they got destroyed by Indiana. And I have Georgia ahead of Ohio State, who I've got at 5 because Georgia played a tougher schedule than Ohio State. It did. Ohio State's best win was against Texas, who Georgia beat much easier than Ohio State. It did. And Georgia's win in the regular season over Ole Miss was a better win than that Ohio State win over Texas. It wasn't. Ohio State's second best win was against Michigan, and I think Georgia's SEC championship win was the more impressive win than that one. But I only put Oregon at 6 because Ohio State did play Indiana the closest of anybody, except that one game that Indiana almost lost against Penn State. And Ohio State was competitive with Miami, who nearly beat Indiana, who destroyed Oregon. And number 7 and 8 is easy because Oregon beat Texas Tech and Texas Tech beat BYU. I watched that whole BYU Georgia Tech bowl game, and BYU had to run a different offense than they usually do. They're usually more of a running team, but in this game, because their running back LJ Martin quit to get ready for the NFL draft, they had to run not an air raid offense, but a pass first offense. And their quarterback, Bear Bachmeier, showed that he can be more than just a good game manager. He can win a game with his arm. He threw for 325 in this game and completed 71% of his passes and averaged a really good 8.6 yards per throw. And even though this game was really close, 25 to 21, and BYU had to come from behind to win the game. If it hadn't have been for mistakes, BYU could have won this game easier because on the opening drive, Kalani Sitake made a rare bad coaching decision to go for it on 4th and goal from the 1, which cost them 3 points, and then BYU fumbled on a kickoff. That put Georgia Tech 1st and goal, which cost them 7 points. So without those mistakes, BYU would have won this game by 2 touchdowns. But BYU's defense played great in this one. Haynes King didn't have anywhere near his best game, and you could tell that BYU was clearly the better coached team in this game. But I put BYU ahead of Texas A&M, who I've got at 10, because BYU's win over Utah was a really good win, and they also beat Arizona, who turned out to be a good team. And Texas A&M only got one good win, which was against Notre Dame. And I put Texas at 9 because even though Texas A&M had one game of a better record than they did, Texas beat Texas A&M. And I watched that whole Texas Michigan Bowl game, and I saw a lot of reason to be optimistic about the Texas offense next season. Arch Manning played probably his best game so far in his college career. He played like he was supposed to play at the beginning of this season, and Texas was out at their 2 best running backs, Wisner and Baxter, who both entered the transfer portal. But Arch Manning made up for that by himself, running for 155 yards and 2 touchdowns on only 9 carries. He averaged at 17.2 yards per carry. Now, the Texas defense didn't play very well, but they were without 6 starters on that defense. So I put Alabama at 11 and Oklahoma at 12. So Alabama doesn't look as bad now after the way Indiana destroyed Oregon. But even though Alabama and Oklahoma are tied in that they each got a road win against each other, and Oklahoma did have the SEC's best defense this year, in my opinion. Alabama's win over Oklahoma was a playoff win, and they won their game by more than Oklahoma won the regular season meeting by it. Overall, if you look at how these two teams played last season, besides against each other, Alabama was a little bit more impressive, I would say. Oklahoma's best win besides Alabama was against Michigan, and Alabama's win over Georgia was a much better win than that one, and their win over Vanderbilt was a little better than that win, I would say. And I put Notre Dame at 13 because even though I think Notre Dame could have been more competitive in the college football playoff than both Alabama and Oklahoma, Notre Dame, I don't think could have won the whole thing though. And Oklahoma and Alabama did both play a much tougher schedule than Notre Dame did, especially Oklahoma. But Notre Dame, their best win against USC. It clearly wasn't a great win because USC, after watching their bowl game, they were an above average team, but that was about it. And Alabama's win over Georgia was a lot better than that Notre Dame win over USC. And Oklahoma's win over Alabama was a better win than that one too. But if Notre Dame wanted to prove a point, they should have played in a bowl game instead of whining about it. Now, I know it may have been because a lot of their starters weren't going to play if it wasn't going to be a playoff game, but still, the backups no doubt would have loved the experience. And I've got Utah at 14. So even though I think this was one of Kyle Whittingham's best teams, Utah didn't get any ranked wins. I only saw a little of their bowl game, but they clearly didn't miss Whittingham in that. They got a dominant 44-22 win over Nebraska, and they were missing their two best offensive linemen, Spencer Fano and Caleb Loma, who quit to get ready for the draft, but you wouldn't have noticed it with how they played. Only gave up one sack and ran for 225 and averaged 5 yards a run. And the best player on the field in that game was Utah quarterback Devin Dampier. He had a huge game of 458 yards of total offense and five total touchdowns. And if you're a Utah fan, well, Kyle Whittingham leaving is certainly bad news. Something to be happy about is Devin Dampier announced that he is coming back next season. And I've got Virginia at 15. Now, I think as close as their game was, if Missouri would have had Bo Prabila, they probably would have won that game, but there's no way to know that for sure. And Missouri also didn't have their offensive coordinator who left to take a head coaching job. So Eli Drinkwitz was calling the plays himself, and I don't think he's a very good play caller. But you would have thought, as well as Missouri's defense played in this one, that their two great running backs, Hardy and Roberts, could have done enough to win this game for them. But after that first drive, Virginia shut them down. But Virginia coach Tony Elliott was considered to be one of the worst coaches in the country before this season and was very much on the hot seat. But now he's certainly off the hot seat. And this was one of the most impressive coaching jobs this season, in my opinion. And this was Virginia's best year in school history. I've got Iowa State at 16 because they beat TCU, who I've got at 17, and they also beat Iowa. And the only difference in record between Iowa State and TCU and Iowa is because TCU and Iowa played in a bowl game, and Iowa State didn't. But I put TCU ahead of Houston, who I've got at 18, and USC, who I've got at 19, because TCU beat both Houston and USC. So I watched that whole TCU USC bowl game, and even though USC was missing their two best wide receivers, Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, TCU was missing their quarterback Josh Hoover, which was an even bigger loss. And the reason why TCU won that game is because they were able to stop USC's run game. And Houston, I didn't see much of their bowl win over LSU, but they did make a non-existent LSU offense look decent, but they also made what had been a really good LSU defense in the regular season look bad. Although LSU was missing most of their starters on defense because they quit to get ready for the draft, but uh, Willie Fritz, I think, did one of the most impressive coaching jobs this season with this Houston team because they were expected to at best go 6-6. And I had to tie USC, Washington, Illinois, and Michigan all at 19 because USC beat Michigan and Illinois beat USC and Washington beat Illinois and Michigan beat Washington. Now, I didn't watch Illinois' bowl game over Tennessee where they won 30 to 28 on a last second field goal. But I know that Illinois was hoping to go to the college football playoff this season, but Brett Bielema has now gotten them their most successful 2-year stretch in school history. And Washington, they just played Boise State in a bowl game, but they were dominant, winning 38 to 10. And they just got some momentum going into next season because they were able to get their quarterback Damon Williams to stay after he had entered the transfer portal. And I put Iowa at 23 and Vanderbilt at 24 because even though Iowa had one less win than Vanderbilt did and one more loss, I'm counting that bowl win that Iowa got over Vanderbilt. And USC, they beat Iowa, but Washington, Illinois, and Michigan, none of them played Iowa, so that's why I put Iowa last of the 9-win Big Ten teams. But even though Vanderbilt was missing their tight end Eli Stowers in that game, who was their best offensive player besides Diego Pavia, Iowa, even though they didn't have near as good of a quarterback as Vanderbilt did, they were so much better up front than Vanderbilt, and that's why they won that game. And for number 25, Georgia Tech was the best choice out of all the 9-win teams because Georgia Tech beat Wake Forest and Wake Forest beat SMU and SMU beat Louisville and SMU also beat Arizona, who was a 9-win team. But that'll be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.